On August 14, 1803, deep in Lima's most refined quarter, the servants of the Palacio de Diagar estate stumbled onto something that cracked the surface of colonial Peru's polished society. 4 women, a marchioness and her 3 daughters, all carrying visible pregnancies, all claiming the same father. The scandal that the Spanish crown locked away in sealed records still surfaced decades later in fragments, revealing a truth so corrosive that it threatened to collapse the fragile order of an empire already rotting from the inside out. At the center stood not a nobleman, not a merchant, not even a free man. He was property, a slave named Domingo, owned by the very family he would ruin. Before diving into the buried history of the Palacio de Diagar household and the secret that devoured it, let me ask something of you. If stories pulled from the darkest corners of the past fascinate you, the ones deliberately erased, redacted, or buried by those in power, subscribe to this channel. Leave a comment letting us know where you're listening from. Your support helps us exhume what history tried to suffocate. This isn't folklore whispered in taverns. The record still exists, scattered through church documents, vice-regal correspondence, and faded ledgers that somehow escaped the Crown's effort to scrub all trace of the event. What you're about to hear is a reconstruction, a story the authorities labeled too dangerous for daylight. The year 1803 sat at a strange moment in Lima's history. Once the polished jewel of Spain's South American holdings, the city's golden surface had started to crack. Viceroy Gabriel de Aleles ruled from the palace with a tightening grip, knowing revolution flickered in neighboring lands. A brittle caste system, peninsulares, criollos, mestizos, indigenous people, and Africans in bondage, kept the illusion of order through rigid control. At the peak of that pyramid sat the Palacio de Diagar family. Maria Catalina de Aguirre Velasco, widow of the late Marquise Fernando Palacios, ruled her household with the same severity her husband once wielded. At 43, she was still a force in Lima's aristocracy, her approval or disdain capable of shaping destinies among the elite. Her 3 daughters embodied the virtues expected of their rank. Isabella, 24, was engaged to the younger son of a Spanish count, a match meant to tie the family tighter to Madrid's influence. Adriana, 22, possessed a sharp, questioning mind that unsettled her mother, especially when she dared ask about estate management or finances, matters no woman of her class was meant to understand. Sophia, the youngest at 19, carried a gentle grace that made her a favorite at gatherings, though many remarked that she often seemed absent, her gaze wandering elsewhere even in conversation. Their mansion dominated nearly an entire block in San Lazaro district. Its thick adobe walls painted the soft yellow favored by the wealthy. Inside, 47 servants kept the place humming. Cooks, maids, gardeners, stable hands, attendants. 23 of them were enslaved. Their work provided the comfort and elegance that upheld the family's reputation. Domingo entered that world 6 years earlier, purchased at auction after the collapse of a sugar estate near Trujillo. The ledger noted him as about 30 years old, literate in both Spanish and Portuguese, strong, skilled in carpentry and metalwork. 850 pesos exchanged hands. What stood out wasn't his strength, it was his literacy, a rare and dangerous trait among the enslaved. At first he was assigned to the stables, but his craftsmanship soon pulled him into the mansion's heart. He repaired chairs and carved moldings, reinforced doors, polished intricate woodwork that gleamed under candlelight. His duties brought him close to the family in ways most enslaved workers never experienced. Measuring windows in private chambers, fixing locks on studies, installing shelves in the library where Adriana liked to spend long afternoons. Those who worked beside him later recalled a quiet man who kept his eyes lowered, his words few, his work flawless. Senora Vargas, the head housekeeper, once mentioned to the cook that Domingo seemed different. Too careful, too alert, though she couldn't explain why. The household moved like clockwork, mass at dawn in the chapel. Breakfast in the formal dining room, visitors in the salon while the daughters practiced needlework or music. Charity work in the afternoons, elaborate dinners in the evenings, prayers before bed. It was a rhythm designed to endure across generations. But by early 1803, something began to shift. Servants whispered of small irregularities. Isabella, normally punctual for morning prayers, began arriving late, pale and tired. Adriana stopped her daily garden walks, locking herself in her chamber for hours. Sophia, once delicate in appetite, began requesting unusual dishes, strange cravings that made kitchen staff exchange knowing glances. Even the marchioness seemed changed. During her private confessions with Father Tomás Calderón, her hands trembled while fingering her rosary. Her voice faltered on familiar prayers. When he asked if something troubled her, she brushed it aside, too quickly. By late April, the head seamstress came to Senora Vargas with a hesitant confession. The marchioness's gowns all required letting out at the waist, and so did those of Isabella, Adriana, and Sophia. The seamstress, who had seen enough women through enough pregnancies to recognize the signs, whispered what everyone else feared to say aloud. Vargas dismissed it as coincidence. Perhaps the result of too many fine dinners, she said. But the seamstress persisted. The loosened corsets, the queasiness, the frequent rest. It was impossible not to notice. Pregnancy itself wasn't shameful. Widows remarried, daughters took husbands. But 4 women from the same household, no engagements announced, no suitors visiting, each showing the same unmistakable condition. That was a mystery so explosive it could collapse reputations overnight. Morning light broke on August 14th, without hint of the storm waiting inside the mansion. Servants followed their routines, fires lit, water fetched, bread baking in the oven. At 6, the chapel bells rang, and everyone gathered for morning mass. But only Adriana appeared among the family pews. She knelt alone, her face bloodless, fingers clenched white around the polished wood in front of her. Father Calderón faltered mid-prayer, glancing toward the empty seats where the marchioness and her other daughters always sat. In 6 years of service, he had never seen them absent, not even in sickness or mourning. His eyes met Senora Vargas near the chapel door. She shook her head. She didn't know why they were missing. The mass ended quickly. As the servants dispersed, Calderón approached Adriana. Her voice came in a whisper barely carried by air. "You need to see for yourself. The Blue Room." The Blue Room was sacred ground inside that house, the marchioness's private sanctuary, where only a few were ever allowed. The priest followed Adriana down the hall, his cassock brushing the marble floor. Vargas trailed behind them uneasy. The door stood ajar. Calderón pushed it open, then froze. Inside, the marchioness sat upright in a high-backed chair. On either side of her, Isabella and Sophia. All 3 in loose gowns, the morning sun streaming across their laps, outlining what the fabric no longer concealed. The truth was visible, undeniable. The priest's hand went to the crucifix at his chest. He whispered a prayer that died before reaching his lips. The marchioness's voice broke the silence, low, commanding even through her fatigue. "Close the door, Father. Nothing that happens here leaves this room." Vargas stayed in the hall, heart pounding, understanding she was now a witness to something forbidden. Inside, Calderón tried to speak, but words tangled in disbelief. 4 women, all pregnant, all unmarried. No explanation that could preserve their honor or the church's sense of order. Adriana spoke first, composed in a way that made her mother's silence feel heavier. It began in February, not all at once, but close enough. When the priest finally found his voice to ask who, the air seemed to thicken. Isabella's quiet sobs filled the space. Sophia wouldn't lift her gaze. The marchioness looked straight at him. Domingo. The name hit like a hammer. The carpenter. The slave Calderon staggered back. His mind scrambled through canon law and human logic. Impossible. Yet the proof sat before him. Adriana explained they had only discovered the full truth the previous month. Each had believed herself alone until Sophia's condition exposed the pattern. When confronted one by one, they all realized the same man connected them. Calderon sat heavily in a chair, the crucifix digging into his palm. The mind trained to find order in sin found none here. The marchioness spoke again. He came for work, repairs, locks, shelves. Always legitimate reasons. Always alone with us. He was persuasive. Her voice did not carry fear. It carried defiance, exhaustion, maybe guilt, too complex to categorize. He urged her to report it to the viceroy. She refused with fury. "Do you understand what that would mean?" she said. "Our destruction. Public record. Official scandal. Isabella's engagement gone. Adriana's prospects ruined. Sophia disgraced. Our name would become a cautionary joke whispered in salons." He insisted justice required exposure. Adriana's calm voice cut through. "We don't intend to hide it. We intend to control it." And so began the conspiracy, not born from evil but from desperation. Sculpted by a society that punished women for the truths men could bury with ease. The first step was clear. Deal with Domingo. "He's in the carpentry shed," the marchioness told him. "He suspects nothing. He believes each of us guards our own shame. What must be done with him?" Calderon's silence held the weight of judgment. The law was merciless. A slave who violated a free woman was executed publicly, his body destroyed as example. But such punishment raised questions. Questions led to records. Records led to ruin. Then Sophia's trembling voice broke through. "Please, don't hurt him." The words stunned the room. Her mother's eyes flared with anger, but she hesitated. Sophia continued, her tone rising, shaking, filled with something rawer than fear. "What justice exists here? He'll die because he exists, because the law cannot imagine our truth. Killing him doesn't erase what's happened, it just adds another death to the lie we've already built." The marchioness's hand lifted, then dropped. Rage melted into something hollow. "She's right," she whispered finally. "His death solves nothing. We need another way." Father Calderon stood at the edge of moral collapse. Duty demanded confession to the authorities. Compassion, perhaps cowardice, urged silence. "What do you propose?" The marchioness's eyes hardened. "He disappears. Not dead, gone. Sold north, maybe to the mountains. Somewhere he can't speak, can't return, can't be traced." Adriana, methodical even in sin, outlined the rest. "The children will be placed with trusted families. My mother's to Arequipa, mine and Isabella's to Cusco, Sophia's to Trujillo. Births kept quiet, babies sent away at once. Within months, our bodies return to normal, our names remain untouched. The storm dies before it ever breaks." Calderon asked about the 4th child. Silence. Then the marchioness's voice, low, final. "Some babies don't survive." The priest closed his eyes. He had crossed from witness to accomplice. "I'll speak with Domingo," he said at last. "No," the marchioness replied. "You'll only tell him his fate. He forfeited the right to speak when he touched us. This ends today." That afternoon, in the carpentry shed behind the mansion, Father Calderon carried out his grim errand. The carpentry shed sat behind the mansion, half hidden by trees and the stable wall. Its air smelled of sawdust, varnish, and old sweat, the scent of honest work that had no place in the luxury it maintained. Father Calderon approached alone as the marchioness demanded. The fewer witnesses, the safer the secret. Domingo worked at his bench, planing a slab of mahogany, his arms steady, his focus precise. The scrape of metal on wood filled the space, rhythmic, patient. When the priest stepped inside, the sound continued for several strokes before stopping. Domingo turned, wiping his hands on his apron, his expression unreadable. His dark eyes met Calderon's briefly, then drifted toward the floor in practiced obedience. The priest's voice came out flat, almost mechanical. 4 women in this house carry children. They all name you as the father. No shock, no denial at first, only stillness. Then a flicker. Something sharp and knowing passed through Domingo's gaze. They lie, he said quietly. The words struck Calderon like blasphemy, not for their defiance, but for their calm logic. Why would they lie about this? Domingo's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Because the truth is worse. Calderon's chest tightened. What truth? Domingo's tone hardened. You think I forced myself on 4 women of this house? In rooms full of servants? In corridors watched day and night? A slave cannot hide sin that great. I would not be standing here if I had tried. No, Father. They choose this story because it explains what cannot be confessed. It spares them while destroying me. The priest felt his balance tilt. He'd expected guilt, perhaps pleading. Not this quiet, reasoned defense that made sense against all logic he wanted to believe. Domingo stepped closer, his voice low. The marchioness entertained male visitors, men of her station. Isabella's fiancé from Spain visited long before their union was made official. Adriana met with Miguel Sandoval, the merchant's son, in that library you bless with your presence. Sophia has been keeping company with Pablo Herrera, the textile heir on Mercer Street. You know their names, don't you? Men whose reputations must stay clean. So they use me, the one with no name, no defense, no right to truth. The priest's mind raced. Sandoval and Herrera were real, prominent, well-connected. Could Domingo have fabricated this from rumors alone, or had he seen more than anyone suspected? Why should I believe you? Calderon's voice cracked between anger and fear. Why believe them? Domingo countered. 4 noblewomen, all pregnant by the same slave in secret without witness or alarm. It defies reason, but a convenient monster is always easier than facing one's own hypocrisy. The priest's certainty crumbled. If Domingo spoke truth, then the women were conspirators, not victims. If they spoke truth, then this man had violated the most rigid barrier of their world. Either possibility was unthinkable. Calderon steadied himself. Regardless of truth, the decision stands. You will be sold, sent north. You will tell no one of this. If you speak, you die. Domingo's eyes held his for a long, unbearable moment. So justice depends on silence, he murmured. I am punished for crimes I did not commit, so others may continue pretending purity. I am property, not a man. Property has no right to justice. He paused, his expression softening with a strange peace. I accept my fate, Father. Resistance brings death. Escape brings death. Silence at least buys me breath, even if it's far from here. But know this, the truth doesn't vanish just because you bury it. It waits. That night, Domingo vanished from Lima. 2 hired men, outsiders with no stake in the household, led him away under the cover of darkness. Senora Vargas watched from the courtyard shadows as they disappeared into the mist, carrying not just a man but the weight of the family's collective guilt. The official record was brief. Slave Domingo, sold to northern buyer, 850 pesos received. No buyer's name, no receipt, no shipping manifest. He was erased so completely that it seemed he had never existed. By dawn, the servants had their orders. No questions, no discussions, no recollections. 8 workers who could not promise obedience were dismissed, paid off with modest coins and quiet threats that ensured their silence. The mansion became a tomb of secrets. Through the months that followed, the pregnancies advanced under strict confinement. The marchioness withdrew from society, claiming illness. The daughters vanished from Lima's gatherings, their absences explained by charitable retreats or visits to distant relatives. In truth, they were hidden on the mansion's 3rd floor, a part of the house servants were forbidden to enter. A midwife from Callao was brought in under guard, sworn to secrecy with both gold and fear. She visited weekly, recording nothing, asking no questions. Her role was simple: deliver the children, disappear. Father Calderon visited often, his presence justified by confession and prayer. But his duties had shifted. He was now keeper of lies. Each visit drew him deeper into moral quicksand. The women bore the strain differently. The marchioness remained stoic, her composure cold and precise, treating pregnancy like a logistical inconvenience. Isabella fluctuated between hysteria and emptiness, her eyes often fixed on the city through shuttered windows. Adriana became distant, detached, retreating into silence broken only by ritual prayer. Sophia, gentle, tender Sophia, spoke to her unborn child when she thought no one could hear, her voice carrying both love and despair. Then came October, and with it, rumors. Miguel Santival had left suddenly for Spain. Pablo Herrera had departed for Buenos Aires to oversee his family's trade business. Both men Domingo had named. Both vanished conveniently. Calderon began to suspect arrangements had been made. Quiet payments, quiet threats. He didn't ask. Some knowledge poisoned even priests. November brought relentless rain, flooding the streets, hammering the roof like a warning. On the night of the 19th, lightning ripped across the sky as the marchioness's cries echoed through the halls. The midwife worked until dawn while thunder rolled overhead. When morning came, the storm had broken, and so had something inside the house. A child was born too early. The midwife whispered the explanation: lungs undeveloped, life too short. Yet Calderon, arriving moments after, saw what the midwife pretended not to notice. The child's skin too dark, the nose too broad, the lips too full. The features the family could never acknowledge. The priest performed last rites himself, his voice shaking as he buried the tiny body in the garden under the orange trees. 2 days later, Isabella delivered a healthy boy. That night, the child was smuggled out by servants who traveled to Cusco, where the Sanchez family waited to receive their adopted ward. A week later, Adriana gave birth to a girl. The infant was sent to Arequipa, to the Flores household. Loyal friends, well paid for their silence. Finally, on December 8th, Sophia gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl. Both strong, both crying, both taken before sunrise to Trujillo, split between 2 families who were told only what they needed to know. By mid-December, the 3rd floor was empty. The midwife left with more silver than she'd ever seen, and the kind of fear that makes people keep promises. Servants who had glimpsed too much were dismissed. New staff arrived, ignorant of what the walls had witnessed. The Marchioness Isabella and Adriana resumed public life in spring. The scandal that had nearly destroyed them seemed buried. But Sophia never recovered. She stayed confined, refusing food, refusing visitors. When Father Calderon tried to reach her, she only stared past him, her lips forming prayers that never became sound. After that, he asked no more questions, but he kept his own coded records, an insurance policy written in numbers. The peace, such as it was, never lasted long. In March 1806, a new letter arrived, this time from Arequipa. Inside was a portrait, a painting of Adriana's daughter, now 3 years old. The artist had been too skilled. The girl's complexion was too dark, her features too distinct. The letter accompanying it was polite but cold. Our neighbors have begun to ask questions. The priest expresses concern. We will require additional support to protect your interests. The pattern continued. Money for silence more each year. The cost of hiding truth became nearly as ruinous as exposure itself. Adriana began to unravel. She attended mass daily, fasting until her skin bruised. She wore a hair shirt beneath her silk gowns, punishment disguised as devotion. During one of her confessions, she whispered through tears, "I dream of her, the child I never held. She has my eyes. I traded her life for my comfort." Calderon tried to console her, but his words felt like ash. Then came the day when past and present collided, when the ghost of Domingo returned in flesh. It was a warm afternoon when Isabella received a visitor from Cusco, Señora. Vargas led him in, a young man in travel-stained clothes, his bearing polite but confident. His features made her heart skip. The skin tone, the shape of the face, the familiarity impossible to ignore. He bowed slightly. "My name is Carlos Mendizabal. I believe you knew my father, Domingo, who once worked here." The world seemed to tilt. Calderon, summoned in haste, arrived to find the room frozen in disbelief. Carlos explained he had spent years tracing his father's disappearance. The records led to this mansion, where the trail abruptly ended in 1803. No plantation logs, no shipping manifests, no trace of sale. "It's as if he vanished," he said, his gaze unwavering. The marchioness's poise returned just enough to lie. "Your father was sold to a plantation in the north. The details have been lost to time." Carlos nodded slowly. "Strange. I searched the records myself. There's no entry of any such transaction, not one. Even the bureaucrats of empire rarely lose track of property." His tone was calm, but the challenge was clear. He asked to speak with servants from that period. She replied they had all left or died. He thanked her with unsettling courtesy and left an address in Lima should she recall anything further. When he was gone, silence thickened like smoke. Adriana's whisper carried the fear they all felt. "He knows." The marchioness dismissed it, but Calderon saw truth in Adriana's eyes. The past had begun to unearth itself. That night, the priest sat alone in his rectory, the candles burning low, the years of complicity pressing down like a physical weight. He listed the casualties in his mind. Sophia, dead by despair. Domingo erased. The children scattered. The women haunted. And now the son returned to demand answers. The knock came near midnight. Vargas again, her face pale as moonlight. "Father, you must come. Isabella, she's confessed. To him, to everything." When he entered the blue room, the scene mirrored the past. Isabella in the same chair her mother once occupied, her face swollen from crying. Carlos stood near the window, eyes blazing with revelation and rage. The marchioness paced the floor, her dignity splintered. Adriana clutched her rosary in the corner, whispering broken prayers. Calderon understood instantly. The secret had detonated. The air in the blue room felt heavy enough to choke. Isabella's sobs came in waves, sharp and irregular, echoing off the painted walls that had once witnessed prayer and now absorbed confession. Carlos stood by the window, the city lights flickering on his face, eyes that burned with too many years of searching and too much knowledge gathered in silence. The marchioness moved in tight circles across the rug like an animal pacing a cage, every step a crack in the armor that had protected her for decades. Adriana sat half-hidden in the corner, her fingers working through rosary beads with mechanical rhythm, lips moving but forming no sound. When Father Calderon entered, none of them turned. They didn't need to. Everyone in that room already knew why he had come. The marchioness's voice broke the stillness first, low and sharp. "Tell me this isn't true. Tell me you filled his head with poison and lies." Carlos didn't flinch. His tone carried no theatrics, only exhaustion. "I didn't have to. She told me everything." The words poured out of her like water breaking through a dam. Isabella pressed her hands to her face, as if hiding might undo what she had already released. Her confession had torn open the secret they had guarded with blood and money. The marchioness's denial sounded brittle, almost childish. "You have no proof." Carlos reached into his coat and unfolded a bundle of papers worn from travel. "Proof is all I have. Servants dismissed in 1803, midwife's records, letters between your family and those who took your children. I traced every coin you paid for silence. The trail leads here to this room." The marchioness's skin drained of color. She sank into a chair, the papers rustle louder than breathing. Calderon felt his chest tighten. The walls of the house that had once felt like fortress now seemed transparent, every layer of deceit visible at once. Carlos laid the documents on the table between them. "I didn't come for gold. I came for truth. My father vanished after serving this household for 6 years. No record of sale, no record of death, only absence. I needed to know what kind of people can erase a man so completely." Adriana lifted her head. Her eyes looked older than her mother's. "You want revenge, I want justice," Carlos answered. "For my father, for the children you abandoned, for the truth you buried beneath your prayers." The marchioness laughed, a short, broken sound. "Justice? You think dragging this through the streets of Lima will give you justice? It will ruin everyone involved, including the children you claim to protect. They'll bear the mark of illegitimacy forever. You'll turn them into outcasts just to satisfy your anger." The words struck, but Carlos didn't retreat. "They deserve to know where they came from. Silence is just another prison." Adriana's voice rose, steady and almost gentle. "Then let them learn someday when the world can bear it. Keep it private, sealed but true. Spare them the public ruin you wish for us." Calderon felt a flicker of relief in her suggestion, a thin bridge over an abyss. He saw in Carlos's expression a war between fury and reason. The young man's hands trembled as he pressed them against the table. "I want to know what really happened," Carlos said finally. "Was my father what you claimed, a violator? Or was he a scapegoat for your shame?" No one answered at first. The ticking of the mantel clock filled the silence. The marchioness's gaze wandered toward the crucifix hanging over the door, as if searching for courage she'd long exhausted. When she finally spoke, her voice was stripped of all command. "I don't know what truth means anymore. He approached each of us differently. Perhaps it began as kindness, perhaps as temptation. He was gentle. He listened. We forgot what boundaries meant until it was too late." Isabella lifted her head. Tears streaked her face, but her words came clearly. "He treated me like a person. When my mother arranged my marriage to a man I'd never met, I was terrified. Domingo came to fix a mirror in my room. He listened. He made me feel seen. I don't know how it turned into more, only that it did." Adriana's voice followed, quiet but certain. "He spoke to me as an equal, not as property, not as a child. I knew the danger, but I wanted to feel human, just once. In this world, women exist to be displayed, not heard. He changed that, if only for a moment." Calderon closed his eyes. Sophia had written the same in her hidden journal before her death, words the priest had burned but never forgotten. "He is the only one who sees me as real." The marchioness's confession came last. "After my husband died, I became a symbol, not a woman. Everyone wanted decisions, signatures, influence. Domingo wanted nothing. He spoke to me as if I were simply alive. I mistook that for safety. It became something else. By the time I understood, the sin had already taken root. Carlos listened without interrupting, his jaw tight, his eyes unfocused. When they finished, he whispered more to himself than to them. So he never forced you. You were all complicit. And when the consequences arrived, you destroyed him to save yourselves. Adriana nodded once. Yes. We convinced ourselves we had no choice, that the laws and expectations of this city left us only one path. But we chose it. We built our salvation on his destruction. Carlos's voice turned cold. Where is he? The marchioness hesitated. We don't know. Calderon's throat constricted as he forced the truth out. He was taken away by 2 men hired through the port. We believed they would transport him north. We never learned their names, never asked for details, so he could be dead. The priest's silence was answer enough. Carlos's hands curled into fists. Then you're murderers. Not by accident, not through ignorance. By command. You paid for his disappearance and refused to ask what that meant. No one denied it. The truth hung between them like smoke from a candle that refused to die. I want their names, Carlos demanded. The men who took him. And I want to see the children. They deserve to know who they are, even if the world never does. The bargain was made that night, somewhere between threat and mercy. Carlos would receive the names and enough funds to trace his father's final path. He would be permitted to meet the surviving children quietly, to tell them a version of the story gentle enough not to shatter their lives. In exchange, the scandal would remain sealed. Father Calderon drafted documents recording every detail: the pregnancies, the concealment, the arrangements for the children, the disappearance of Domingo. He sealed them under church authority, to be opened only by direct descendants after all involved had died. Truth preserved, hidden like a relic too sacred and too shameful for light. Carlos left at dawn with the names that Tomas Ibarra had gathered years earlier. 2 men from Lima's port quarter, paid to make problems vanish. 3 weeks later he returned, his face drawn tight, eyes like coals burned too long. Calderon met him at the church door and read the answer in his expression before he spoke. I found them, Carlos said. They remembered him. Inside the study, the marchioness, Isabella, and Adriana waited. None had slept. The young man refused the offered chair, standing rigid as he delivered the verdict. My father never left Lima. They took him out in a small boat under cover of night. They were told he must never return, must never speak, must simply cease to exist. The simplest way, they said, was the bay. Weighted stones, deep water, no witnesses. Isabella made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Adriana pressed her hands over her mouth, her body folding inward. The marchioness remained still, stone-faced, though her knuckles blanched where they gripped the armrest. Carlos continued, voice mechanical, stripped of emotion to keep from breaking. He was alive when they dropped him. He didn't struggle. He only watched them. One of the men said he looked almost relieved, as if he'd known from the start this was how it would end. The silence that followed felt endless. The priest's breath caught in his throat. The room, the city, the entire world seemed to shrink around the weight of those words. Carlos's gaze swept over them. You killed him. You can dress it in excuses, but that's what it is. You ordered a disappearance knowing what those men did for a living. You just didn't want to hear the details. The marchioness finally broke. We didn't order his death, only his removal. You ordered his erasure, Carlos snapped. You built a wall of ignorance and hid behind it. That's cowardice, not innocence. Adriana staggered to the window, vomited into a decorative urn, then sank to the floor, shaking. Isabella sat motionless, tears sliding down her face in silence. The marchioness's lips trembled but formed no words. Carlos turned toward the door. I won't expose you publicly, not for your sake, for the children's. They'll never know the full horror, only that their father died at sea. But understand this, my silence isn't mercy. It's judgment. You get to live with what you did. Every morning when you see your reflection, remember that he's still beneath the water, and that your comfort cost his breath. He paused at the doorway. I'll tell the children he was a good man who died traveling north. That's true enough, but you will know he drowned because you feared shame more than sin. When the door closed behind him, no one moved. The afternoon faded into dusk, and still they sat, surrounded by the echo of his footsteps. At last Adriana whispered, "I'm leaving. There's a convent in Cusco. They take women who no longer wish to live among the living. I'll stay there until death allows me peace." The marchioness didn't look up. "Running away won't redeem you. I'm not running," Adriana replied. "I'm surrendering." She left the next morning with a single trunk and enough coin to secure acceptance behind convent walls. Isabella remained, a hollow version of the sister who once charmed Lima's salons. She drifted through rooms like a ghost that refused to rest. Every night she checked the locks twice, sometimes 3 times, as if fear of intrusion could keep memories from entering. She stopped attending gatherings, claiming illness, though society had already begun forgetting her name. The marchioness stayed rigid in her routines. She continued hosting small dinners, donating to charities, keeping up the illusion that nothing had happened. Yet servants noticed new habits. Lamps left burning all night, a rosary clutched so tightly her palms bled. Father Calderon watched them all and felt his faith thin to a thread. He had entered priesthood believing confession brought absolution. Now he knew some sins carved holes too deep to fill. He still kept the sealed documents locked in the church archive, a record of complicity disguised as duty. Years passed quietly. Adriana's letters arrived from Cusco, polite, detached, describing simple days of prayer. In 1811 the letters stopped. The convent reported pneumonia. The priest suspected she had simply stopped eating, stopped fighting. Isabella lived another few years, brittle as porcelain. In 1815 servants found her dead in bed, her expression strangely peaceful, as if sleep had finally given her the release confession never could. The marchioness survived until 1819. In those final years, she poured her fortune into hospitals, schools, and efforts to end slavery, a cause whispered about in elite circles as eccentric charity. She never explained her reasons. Perhaps guilt had found its only language in generosity. Carlos Mendizabal kept his word. He visited the children often, calling himself a family friend. He watched them grow into adults who would never know the full story of their birth. The girl in Arequipa became educated and married a lawyer. The boy in Trujillo prospered as a merchant. The twins in Trujillo's outskirts thrived under kind guardians. They all lived unaware of the chain of sins that had purchased their safety. Father Calderon aged into frailty, his health failing by 1817. He retired to a small parish beyond Lima's edge, carrying with him the memory of every whispered lie. He tried once to write the complete account of what had happened, to lay bare the rot behind the piety. The attempt broke him. The pages felt like confession without forgiveness. He burned them before his death in 1820. The sealed documents he'd written earlier remained untouched in church archives, labeled with care and buried beneath decades of dust. Years moved on like water wearing down stone. The Palacio de Diagar mansion remained standing, its yellow walls catching the same afternoon light, though everything inside had changed. Servants came and went, unaware of the ghosts that lived behind polished wood and locked doors. The scandal that once threatened to tear Lima's social order apart dissolved into a silence so perfect it almost seemed deliberate. a silence guarded as fiercely as any royal secret. Carlos Mendizabal grew older, his fury reshaping itself into something quieter, harder to measure. The truth he carried no longer screamed for revenge. It whispered, gnawed, settled into his bones. He fulfilled the promise he had made that night in the Blue Room. He sought out the children his father's death had scattered across Peru. He found the girl in Arequipa first, living with the Flores family. She was bright, graceful, her laughter quick, her mind keen. When he introduced himself as a benefactor and friend of her late relatives, she accepted his kindness without suspicion. He helped pay for her schooling, guided her toward an education few women received, and watched her marry a young lawyer who adored her. Her life blossomed in a world built from the ashes of lies. She never learned the name Domingo. The boy in Trujillo grew into a capable merchant's apprentice, his quick wit and natural charm earning him trust and success. Carlos invested in his ventures anonymously, ensuring he would never feel the pinch of want. The young man spoke proudly of his family friend, unaware that the man who visited so often bore the same eyes as his murdered father. The twins, Sophia's children, lived in the care of a modest but kind family near the northern coast. They thrived, loved and sheltered, believing their mother had died giving birth, which in a sense was true. Sophia's soul had died long before her body followed. When Carlos visited, bringing small gifts and stories, they saw him as an uncle from the city, not realizing he watched them with the haunted tenderness of a brother. He kept his silence faithfully. The secret was a living thing by then, one that demanded feeding but forbade release. In Lima, the marchioness aged beneath the weight of reputation and remorse. She maintained her dignity in public, her name still opening doors, her wealth funding charities that baffled her peers. She financed hospitals for the poor, schools that taught mixed-race children to read, shelters for abandoned infants. No one understood why the once proud matriarch of one of Lima's oldest families spent her final years consumed by philanthropy. They saw piety where guilt lived. They mistook redemption for eccentricity. Her donations outlasted her. When she died in 1819 at 58, the city's elite gathered to mourn what they thought was the passing of a pillar of virtue. No one mentioned the whispers that followed her through markets and salons. No one dared question what she had spent her fortune trying to atone for. Father Calderon officiated her funeral mass. His hands shook as he raised the host, his voice nearly gone. He saw the coffin descend and felt nothing, no relief, no sorrow, only exhaustion. In the eyes of the church, she died a penitent woman. In his own heart, he suspected she died afraid that God remembered what the world had chosen to forget. Generations came and went, and the story of the Palacio de Diagar family faded into myth, the kind of rumor that passes through time like a half-remembered nightmare. Lima's skyline shifted, its colonial bones buried under the pulse of a new republic. The old families lost their titles, their names absorbed into the noise of modern streets. Yet every building holds its ghosts, and some walls keep memories long after the living forget. By the 1870s, the mansion no longer belonged to any noble line. The Diagar crest that once hung above its gate had been pried off and sold at auction. What had once been marble halls now echoed with the sounds of children playing and merchants shouting from the courtyard. The scent of candle wax and polished oak had been replaced by stew, laundry soap, and the endless rhythm of daily life. But even among the tenants there were whispers. They spoke of odd sounds at night, the creak of footsteps across the third-floor hallway, the faint cry of an infant where no children slept. The building's owners dismissed it as superstition. They didn't know that the rooms above had once held 4 women, hidden away, carrying secrets that would never rest. The church kept its silence. The sealed packet lay undisturbed in its drawer for nearly another century, its wax seal collecting dust. The writing on the outer page faded until it was barely legible. Only the faint scrawl of sensitive material, not to be opened without authorization, remained. It was a warning disguised as bureaucracy. In time, those who might have remembered the name Domingo were gone. His descendants lived under other surnames, lawyers, merchants, teachers, none aware of the bloodline that connected them to both the oppressed and the powerful. Their faces carried traces of both worlds, features that no longer raised suspicion in a republic that pretended its hierarchies had vanished. Domingo's story survived only in fragments. A ledger entry with no buyer's name, a line of ink that ended abruptly, as if someone had lost interest mid-sentence. Yet the absence itself became a record. Every gap in the archive, every blank space between transactions, spoke louder than words. The empire had been built on such silences. For Father Ignacio Ortega, the man who rediscovered those sealed papers in 1872, the question never left him. What is truth worth when everyone it condemns is already dead? He carried that thought into his sermons, into the confessions he heard, into the restless hours of night when even faith felt like a fragile disguise. He lived another 20 years and never spoke of what he'd read. Though sometimes during Mass he found himself glancing toward the bay, wondering how many other sins the sea still kept. The ocean remains the final confessional, patient and impartial. Tides rise and fall over bones and chains alike, offering no absolution, only forgetting. By the early 1900s, the Palacio de Diagar mansion had become a maze of rented rooms. The blue room where conspiracies were born turned into a dining space for a family of shopkeepers. They painted over the faded walls, covering the original cobalt with a brighter shade that matched modern taste. Children's laughter replaced whispered prayers. The ghosts stayed quiet. One afternoon, a workman repairing a section of floorboards on the third story uncovered a narrow cavity filled with brittle paper and dust. Inside were fragments of old fabric, a broken rosary, and what might have been a letter, though time had eaten the ink away. The discovery caused brief curiosity, then was forgotten. The items were thrown out with construction debris, lost to the city's endless appetite for reinvention. No one realized they had held the last physical trace of a tragedy that had shaped countless unseen lives. Still, the past has a way of resurfacing. In the 1970s, a local historian studying Lima's colonial families came across an archival note that mentioned restricted records relating to the Palacio de Diagar household. He filed a request for access, unaware of the warning written a century earlier. When the envelope was finally brought out, its wax cracked and flaked like dried blood. The historian read the documents with growing disbelief. The narrative unfolded in the measured hand of Father Calderon, detailing every act of deceit, every compromise made in the name of propriety. The births, the concealment, the drowning. At the end of the final page, a single line appeared, written almost as a plea. May the truth someday serve compassion rather than punishment. The historian closed the folio and sat in silence for a long time. He knew publishing it would ignite scandal even after a century and a half. The families connected to the Diagar name still held influence, though they no longer carried titles. Their descendants held offices, owned businesses, occupied pulpits. Revealing the secret would rewrite not only genealogy but history itself. He chose caution over glory. The papers were resealed, the discovery filed away under a new catalog code. He left behind only a small note in his journal. The past sleeps lightly. Best to let it dream. Time continued its work. The 20th century wore down what little remained of colonial Lima. Earthquakes cracked foundations. Developers replaced courtyards with concrete. By the dawn of the 21st century, the mansion stood half abandoned, its balcony sagging, its walls flaking like old parchment. Few who passed it knew its name. But on quiet nights, neighbors still swore they heard the faint rhythm of a hammer striking wood, steady and measured, coming from where the carpentry shed once stood. They said it echoed only when the sea mist rolled in, when the air smelled faintly of linseed oil and salt. They didn't know that centuries earlier, a man named Domingo had worked there until the night he disappeared into the water. The sea never gave him back, and yet in a way, he survived. His bloodline ran through the very society that had erased him. The descendants of his children married into the same circles that once would have branded them impurities. Their names appeared in newspapers, their faces in portraits. No one knew that each carried in their veins the legacy of a man condemned for loving. Beyond the boundaries of his world, the story of the Palacio de Diaga scandal lived on only in those sealed pages and in the quiet persistence of a lineage that refused to die. If you walk through Lima today, you can still find the remains of that mansion tucked behind newer buildings. Its facade, faded to the color of dust, faces the street like a face weathered by secrets. Locals call it La Casa del Silencio. Few know why. Sometimes late at night, the bay wind carries a sound through the alleys. A faint rustle like paper turning, or the echo of voices reciting prayers that never ended. Maybe it's nothing, or maybe the past never truly disappears. It waits beneath the surface, the way bones wait under soil, the way truth waits under silence. The empire that tried to bury its shame has long since fallen, but its sins remain preserved in the details, the ink on hidden pages, the faint outlines of erased names, the children who grew up unaware that their blood once divided a nation. So the story ends not with punishment or redemption, but with the slow endurance of memory. Justice, if it exists at all, lives only in awareness, in the act of uncovering, of refusing to let forgetting finish its work. And now, more than 2 centuries later, you've heard what the Spanish crown tried to silence. You've walked through the corridors of that mansion, felt the weight of the lies, the breath of the ghosts, the pull of the water that swallowed the truth whole. If this story has found you, then its silence has finally broken. Tell someone, share it. Let the echo travel farther than the walls that tried to contain it. Because history doesn't vanish. It waits for someone willing to listen. And if you want to hear more stories like this, the ones history buried beneath power and propriety, subscribe to the channel, tap the notification bell, and help keep these forgotten voices alive. There are more secrets waiting. Just beneath the surface, we'll uncover them, one dark chapter at a time.